You may be seated. Shabbat Shalom. Good morning, everybody. There are radio spots airing throughout Mexico and Central America. Court-appointed researchers are motorbiking throughout the rural hillsides and communities of Guatemala. And they're showing up in courthouses in Honduras in order to conduct public record searches. The efforts are part of a wide-ranging campaign to track down parents separated from their children at the U.S. border beginning in 2017, in what was probably one of the most controversial immigration policies yet to date. It's clear now that there are parents of 545 migrant children that have still not been found. According to documents filed this week in court that are challenging the practice of separating parents from children at the border. About 60 of the children were under the age of 5 when they were separated, as our documents show. So the only thing I have to ask this morning is what's wrong with us as a nation? This isn't a political issue. This is a human issue. Both Democrats and Republicans have passed the buck, kicked the can, dropped the ball. All have missed the opportunity to fix this problem. We have, from our very founding, struggled with an immigration policy where we constantly and consistently have tried to balance the needs of those who are here with the needs of those who want to be here. Our grandparents, our great-grandparents came here searching for what they called the Golden Medina, the land of opportunity, if I were to translate it loosely. But for whatever reason, we are incapable of creating a pathway to citizenship that is fair, that's just, that's compassionate, and that's efficient. But at very least, our immigration policies in this country should be humane. At least our immigration policies ought to do no harm. This morning's Parsha begins with a story of immigration, a story of Abraham making a new life in a new place, working hard to make a living, to grow his family, to have a meaningful existence. It's a great story of rags to riches, the fulfillment of another story in a promised land. When God says to Abraham, Lech lecha me'artzecha u'mimoladetecha u'mibeit avicha el ha'aretz asher ani areka, go forth from the land that you are native to a new land. Leave your father's house, go somewhere brand new. God is instructing Abraham to lay the foundation for human travel, for the freedom to live wherever you'd like. Since Adam and Eve leaving Eden, people have been on the move. Lech Lecha teaches us we all leave somewhere and end up somewhere. And the stories of this morning's reading speak to the inherent skepticism, the paranoia, the fear that so many have of the other. Abraham, forced to go down to Egypt because of famine, tells Sarah to make believe she is his sister because he is paranoid of what those people will think of him. And of course, he imagines they're going to want to do him harm. With no reason at all to believe this, with no evidence of prior cruelty, Abraham assumes the worst, only to discover after a bizarre intervention, the king has no ill intent and asks a critical question, Lama lo higadati li ki ishtechahi. Why didn't you just tell me she was your wife? Why do we always assume the worst? It's a question we have to ask most centrally of our immigration policies. How do we treat each other is the critical issue for our time. Who cares about the environment if we can't learn to live with each other? 18,000 people were allowed to resettle here in the United States. That's refugees only. It's a resettlement program that has not kept up with the global increase of the refugee problem and population. We're not even at 50% in the past 5 years. In 2020, the U.S. refugee limit was the lowest it has ever been since the Refugee Act in 1980. We're facing a global crisis of refugees because of civil wars throughout the world. And we're doing nothing to keep up with it. In fact, we're shrinking away from it. But let me tell you, the stories in this week's Parsha continue. Abraham becomes a warrior. He becomes a statesman. He negotiates international trade agreements and peace accords. And yet his personal life remains unfulfilled until God comes to Abraham and tells him that he will have children. God promises him more than just children. God promises him a nation, that he will be the father of a nation. He will be a sovereign. He'll begin a dynasty. Yet, look, I know I spoke about Abraham in not such glowing terms on Rosh Hashanah. I know I've come down hard in the past on Avraham Avinu, Abraham our father, but I have to tell you, I still have more to say about him. God tells Abraham that he will be a blessing to the whole world. And yet I'm left wondering what Abraham's blessing to the world really was. Was it monotheism? Was it peace among warring nations? Was it saving his family? Was it amassing wealth? Yes, those are all things that Abraham accomplished. But what does it all mean? What's it all worth if we can't figure out how to get along with each other? It's the last story in this morning's Torah reading that has me most twisted, bent out of shape, and it's Abraham's behavior in this week's Parsha that I referenced on High Holiday that has me most troubled by our spiritual ancestor. When Sarah is unable to get pregnant, Abraham is instructed by Sarah to take up with Hagar, her servant. Intellectually, Sarah reasons this through by saying that she must give Abraham what he needs. But that does nothing for her emotionally, and she becomes jealous and feels rightfully discarded and abandoned. To which Abraham says what I think are probably the most cruel words in all of the Torah. Vayomer Avram el Sarai ishto, Hinei shifchatech biyadech, aseh la hatov beinech, v'ta'aneha Sarai v'tivrach mipaneha. Abraham says to Sarah, do with Hagar whatever you want. Do with Hagar whatever you want. She's your maid. And Sarah was so cruel to her that she ran away. As Ramban Nachmanides points out, he offers the most scathing indictment of Abraham and Sarah. He says, Chata'a imenu b'inui hazeh, v'gam Avraham b'hinicho la'asot kein. Our mother Sarah, she sinned in this oppression. And Abraham stood idly by, permitting it, and he therefore sinned as well. According to Ramban, God makes it up to her. V'shama Adonai Elonya v'natan la ben. That Ramban says that God made it up to her by giving her a son because God had heard her oppression. But who is making it up to the people who are being treated so viciously by our country of origin, only to come to our shores and find another version of inhumanity? Who's making it up to those little children, that 545 migrant children torn from their parents' arms, and who now cannot be found? Who's making it up to them? It's horrible. It's criminal. It's a blot on our reputation as a moral authority throughout the world. And I ask, who's going to make it up to them? It has to be us. Elie Wiesel implores us. We must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Sometimes we must interfere when human lives are endangered, when human dignity is in jeopardy. National borders and sensitivities become irrelevant, says Elie Wiesel. Emma Lazarus instructed us with the words that are inscribed on the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. There is a global refugee crisis abound. 30 million people, over half of them children, have fled their homes. So here's my one simple ask this morning. Join River Towns for Refugees. Comprised entirely of volunteers, the group has worked tirelessly since its formation 5 years ago to give a proper welcome to these newcomers and support others who have already resettled in our area. Not only does this group provide local support, food and clothing drives, transportation assistance, housing and job search assistance, but it also supports other organizations within its network. Steve Greeter, the founder, put out a call 2 weeks before Christmas last year that a family was arriving. The community pulled together and gathered everything that they would need to start a new home: beds and bedding, furniture, clothing, winter coats, and the list goes on. In 2019, through the Helping Hands program, volunteers donated over $10,000 in goods and finances to help these families. With the help of over 2,000 volunteers, Westchester Refugee Initiative helped resettle 70 refugee families within Westchester County. It's time for us to lend our helping and sacred hands. Shabbat Shalom. We continue with Musaf, page 184. It's introduced by the